You are already reinforcing something every day, and it is getting stronger whether you notice it or not. Every thought that runs without interruption counts as repetition, and every repetition builds speed, familiarity, and automatic response. That means your mind is not reacting randomly. It is following patterns that have been trained over time. The system is already working. The only question is whether it is working for you or against you. Because whatever you allow to repeat becomes easier to repeat again, and what becomes easy becomes automatic. Most people assume the problem is what they think. It is not. The problem is what they allow to continue without interruption. A thought appears, it feels familiar, it sounds convincing, and it runs its full cycle. That entire cycle is logged as reinforcement. It does not matter if the thought is accurate, it only matters that it was repeated. This is how patterns form, not through truth, but through usage. That is why certain thoughts feel permanent, not because they are fixed, but because they have been practiced. The brain builds efficiency by strengthening what it uses. The more a thought runs, the faster it becomes. The faster it becomes, the less you question it. Eventually, it triggers without effort. That is not authority. That is repetition reaching a level where it feels like identity. There is one instruction most people ignore because it seems too simple to matter, but it is the exact point where control begins. Say to this mountain, not think about it, not analyze it, not tolerate it, say to it. That is not symbolic language, that is a direct interruption mechanism, because the moment a thought continues without interruption, it reinforces itself again, and every reinforcement makes the next cycle stronger. What you experience as a mountain in your mind is not one thought. It is a loop that has been repeated enough times to gain momentum. It appears quickly, it feels familiar, and it carries weight. That weight is not power, it is practice. And anything built through practice can be changed through a different repetition pattern. This is where most people lose control. They recognize the pattern, but they do nothing to stop it from continuing. They observe it, they feel it, and they let it complete its cycle. That means the system logs another repetition and another. Over time, the pattern becomes dominant not because it is correct, but because it is uninterrupted. Silence is not neutral in this system. Silence allows continuation, and continuation builds reinforcement. That is why trying to ignore a thought does not work. Ignoring is passive. Passive response does not interrupt the loop. The system requires active interruption. Speech is that interruption. When you speak, you activate multiple systems at once. Your voice engages motor circuits, your hearing processes the input. Your attention shifts from passive to active. This breaks the automatic flow of the thought loop. It forces the brain to stop repeating and start processing. That moment is where control begins. Your voice is not just expression, it is input. The brain treats what it hears as instruction. When you speak against a pattern, you introduce new input at the exact moment the old pattern is trying to reinforce itself. That creates competition between pathways, and the pathway that is repeated more consistently becomes dominant. This is why thinking alone is not enough. Internal thoughts follow existing patterns. They do not reliably break them. Spoken words create new input that the brain must process differently. That difference is what allows a new pathway to form. The process must be applied exactly. First, identify one dominant pattern that repeats daily, not multiple patterns, one, the one that appears most often or carries the strongest momentum. This is the pattern that has been reinforced enough to feel automatic. That is your target. Second, interrupt it immediately when it appears. Do not wait, do not analyze, do not tolerate. Speak against it, out loud if possible. The goal is not emotion, the goal is interruption. The moment you speak, the automatic loop is broken. That alone reduces its reinforcement. Third, replace it with a structured statement that directly contradicts the pattern. This must be precise. General statements do not compete with specific patterns. The replacement must match the structure of the original thought so it can take its place.
Each time you apply it, you prevent the old pathway from reinforcing and begin strengthening the new one. This is where repetition becomes the deciding factor. One interruption does not change a pattern. Repeated interruption does. Each time the thought appears, the response must be the same. Interrupt, replace, repeat. This creates a new direction for the system to follow. Consistency is what shifts dominance. The brain prioritizes what is repeated most reliably. If the response changes or stops, the old pathway remains active. If the response is consistent, the new pathway becomes easier to access and faster to trigger. Continue this process daily for 21 days. This reduces the strength of the old pattern. Extend the same process to 66 days. This establishes the new pathway as the default response. At that point, interruption begins to happen automatically. The replacement thought starts to appear without effort. That is not control through force. That is control through training. During this process, the original pattern will still appear. That is expected. It does not mean failure. It means the old pathway is still active. Each interruption reduces its reinforcement. Each replacement strengthens the new pathway. The shift is gradual but predictable because the mechanism is consistent. The result is measurable. The thought that once triggered instantly begins to slow down. It becomes easier to interrupt. It carries less weight. The replacement becomes easier to access. It appears faster and with less effort. That is how the system transitions from one dominant pattern to another. There is another layer most people ignore. The system does not only run when you notice it, it runs all day. Everything you hear, watch, and focus on adds to the repetition count. If your environment reinforces the old pattern, it slows down the replacement. If your environment supports the new input, it accelerates the shift. The system is continuous. It does not pause. This is why intentional input matters, not because it feels better, but because it changes what is repeated. You are not trying to eliminate thoughts. You are controlling which ones are reinforced. That is the only lever that changes the outcome. Most people stop too early. They interrupt a few times, then return to silence. Silence allows the old pattern to continue, and continuation rebuilds what was interrupted. That is why the cycle repeats. Repetition is not optional. It is the mechanism itself. Without it, nothing changes. With it, change becomes inevitable. You are already repeating something every day. That repetition is already shaping your responses, whether you notice it or not. This system replaces random repetition with controlled repetition. It replaces passive continuation with active direction. It gives you a process that produces a predictable result. So start now. Identify one pattern. Interrupt it immediately when it appears. Speak against it. Replace it with a structured statement. Repeat this process every time. Do it daily. Continue for 21 days. Extend to 66 days. Expect the pattern to shift because your brain does not resist repetition. It adapts to it. This is not motivation. This is not theory. This is a system that is already running. The only decision is whether you direct it or allow it to continue reinforcing what is already there.